could place coal anywhere from large town plus to city level, but what about the beast? Coal can harm the beast, and the beast ate a 51 kiloton nuke, right? Well, no.
Hey hello. I don't know how to start this video lol, so first of all, good afternoon. You might remember me from the previous video where my friend Dan debunked all those chats that Balrog used as irrefutable proof, right? Yeah. Anyway, I'm here to debunk some of the arguments that Balrog Blaze used in his Cole vs Alex video, or to demonstrate his hypocrisy, or both, however you prefer to see it. I'm not going to debunk arguments that already fall apart by debunking another argument. I must also say that I will mainly talk about their arguments regarding prototype, since I honestly haven't done a proper scaling or gathered enough information about Infamous due to the fact that I don't have the official guide for the first game, but I've glanced at a few things, so I'll argue with what little I have regarding of the verse. First of all, regarding the claim about the ionic storm, I have to say that while it mentions thousands of gigawatts, reducing the power of the conductors to being totally linked to the element they control is a foolish idea the size of a country. It's obvious that their abilities are also enhanced by their own power, because come on, in what universe would smoke or neon, whatever the amount, be capable of destroying chunks of concrete or worse, destroying a wall of Kurdunki prison? This, and things like the fact that they can damage each other with the same element they control, is due to the fact that the conductors are able to weaponize the element they control, which, as I already said, would explain things like Kessler electrocuting coal. The powers of conduits are not only tied to, in the case of coal watts or things like that, but also seem to feed off the conduit's own strength. Returning to the ionic storm, I must say that although Balrog deliberately omitted it, the guide also mentions that in the final battle against the beast, Cole attacks him with the full power of the heavens. How is this calculated? What is the scale of this claim? Who knows, but there it is. Now, regarding Balrog claim that destroying the ray sphere is pointless and that it can't withstand its own explosion based solely on the fact that the ray sphere was in the middle of the explosion and the area beneath it remained undamaged. I must say that this is clearly a simple design decision to visually emphasize to the player that Cole was the origin of the explosion. Saying what Balrog said directly ignores the fact that the ray sphere is the very source of the explosion. John directly confirms that, while holding the ray sphere, he felt as if the energy inside him was trying to escape. In the evil karma Cole mentioned too, he could feel the pulse of the ray sphere as if the energy inside it wanted to escape. This is further confirmed when upon destroying the ray sphere, the energy it contained was released, destroying everything. Switching to the claim that the conduits are immune to the explosion, which is also a huge load of nonsense. Trying to use this image as an argument that the conduits are immune to the ray sphere makes no sense. The text is literally telling us that Cole survived the explosion because the sphere gave him the power to do so. It gave him superhuman abilities. Balrog even says that Cole came out of the explosion unscathed, and come on, do I even need to explain why this statement is ridiculous? We literally see Cole badly injured at the start of the game, right after the explosion. Kessler even checks his vital signs to make sure Cole was alive both at the start of the game and in the comic. But you know what's even dumber? Using these dialogues as proof that the conduits are completely immune to the ray sphere explosion. Sure, Balrog, these dialogues imply that the conduits are immune to the ray sphere, something that's never mentioned. Clearly, those dialogues don't reaffirm what the lore has already told us about the ray sphere giving the conduits the power to survive the explosion, right? The ray sphere takes the neuroelectrical energy from a group of people and concentrates it on the conductor or conductors in the blast area, strengthening them. They don't survive because they're immune, they survive because the ray sphere gives them the power to survive. The Dead Drops have directly mentioned that the ray sphere has killed test subjects before, even in controlled experiments. And no, it's not because the previous test subjects didn't have the conduit gene. The Dead Drops and Infamous 2 confirmed that the NSA and the First Sons could tell who did or didn't have the conduit gene. Furthermore, there is other evidence that the ray sphere's energy actually damages conductors. For example, the blast shard bomb, which even if Cole can withstand, still causes him harm. And I know you'll say, oh, but I counter that the blast shards only power up another bomb, blah blah blah. But the fact that the explosion it causes is purple is a visual indicator to the contrary. The fact that the explosion is purple, just like the blast shards, the ionic energy, and everything containing energy from the ray sphere, is an irrefutable visual indicator that this device detonates the blast shards and is not merely powered by them. And speaking of this, another proof that ray sphere energy affects conduits are the blast cores, which, besides being purple with purple energy, which is already a visual indication that they contain ray sphere energy. They are also described as a larger version of the blast shards themselves, or rather, the blast shards are a smaller version of the blast core. The fact is that when they are absorbed, they leave Cole so exhausted and damaged that he faints. This demonstrates a very clear physical effort in the conduit's body when he absorbed that ray sphere energy. And what if we talk about the living, irrefutable proof that the ray sphere's radiation and energy actually affect the conduits? The random female conduit who was infected with the plague. Well, not just her, the thousands of other conduits as well. I mean, guys, this is obvious. The whole plot point for Cole to choose the evil ending is to cure the conduits infected with the plague. This literally means that the conduits are not immune to the energy or radiation from the ray sphere. Instead, by activating their gene, their bodies gain the resistance to withstand the radiation and the ray sphere's explosion. And why don't we mention John, who was literally reduced to less than atoms by the ray sphere? And yes, it was the ray sphere, not John's atomic powers that Balrog claims he possesses without any proof. This is said by John himself and reaffirmed several times in the guide. But why didn't the ray sphere destroy the other conduits but did destroy John? Easy and logical. The other conduits either had controlled exposure to the explosion or they were exposed to the energy while surrounded by hundreds or thousands of people, from whom the ray sphere drew energy as the explosion occurred and placed it in the conductors, activating their powers. John, meanwhile, was exposed to the same energy in an area where it would only be amplified by a few soldiers who had died minutes before, not being enough to strengthen it properly. John also mentioned with amazement that Cole survived the explosion in one of the dead drops, emphasizing, astonished by this event alone, that Cole is a strong conduit.
There was this kid right in the center of the crater. He had survived.
Conduit.
Oh yeah, a strong one.
Say that the conductors are immune to the ray sphere's energy is like saying they're immune to every energy and the beast's attacks since they're based on pure energy. Oh yeah, now that I remember. Using this specific dialogue to claim that the conductors are immune to the ray sphere makes no sense. And in fact, it actually reinforces what I'm saying, since the beast's powers are based on pure energy. Cole himself says it, John is using his powers like a ray sphere. He doesn't say it causes the same explosion as a ray sphere, but rather that he manages to have the same effect on the conduits by injecting a large amount of energy into their gene. The guide even mentions that John generates a wave of energy that resembles, I repeat resembles, the blast of the ray sphere. Now, since I mentioned this, I want to talk about certain abilities and feats that the beast possesses that no one takes into account. John mentions that he had to rebuild himself with all his willpower. Not regeneration, his power, his consciousness, was left hanging, and he rebuilt himself. And considering that among his powers is the control of energy, I think it's pretty obvious that the beast is capable of converting energy into matter, and vice versa. Something that supports this is precisely that John uses his powers as a ray sphere, taking into account that John must sacrifice the lives of other non-conduit people to create a wave of energy around himself, to transport the energy to the nearest conductor. It seems logical to think that John converts the matter of these people into pure energy to insert it into the conduit sick with the plague. Anyway, I find it strange that Balrog leaves this section here and doesn't mention two very important feats, the total destruction of Empire City by the Beast and the blast of the ICR. Let's address the explosion of Empire first. Now, we literally see the beast destroy all of Empire while Cole mentions that the city is gone, but, I know many people, including Balrog, point out from this panel that the beast didn't actually destroy Empire City since we see a couple of buildings in the distance. But there's the thing. The thing with this panel is that, well, it's wrong. Yeah, just like you heard, it's wrong, and you might be wondering, but Dante, what do you mean by wrong? This panel is misplaced. It's supposed to take place after the scene where Cole wakes up and supposedly after the beast's explosion. However, the guide mentions that Cole was asleep for several days, which means this panel takes place long before Cole wakes up. And I know some will say there's no further evidence that Cole took so long to wake up. LR will say that Cole saw on the news how the beast destroyed Empire. To all this I will reply that you simply watch this newscast, which you can see 2 or 3 missions after arriving in New Moray.
A week ago, the most catastrophic incident on American soil occurred in downtown Empire City. What began as a series of alleged explosions soon escalated into citywide devastation in what is now being called the Empire Event. Today, Empire City lies in ruins. No official numbers have been released, but the latest estimates put the death toll in the millions. The nation mourns, and we are all left craving answers. What caused this sudden destruction? Is the United States under attack? NSA Director Houston is leading an official investigation into the Empire Event, but says their findings so far have been inconclusive. As a precaution, the nation's armed forces have been placed on high alert, and thousands of troops have been recalled from overseas to respond to the crisis. Whether the threat comes from terrorist extremists or some new kind of natural phenomenon, one thing is clear. The threat is ongoing and continues to move southward along the East Coast, leaving a path of devastation wherever it goes.
This news report tells us 2 things. 1. The fight against the beast occurred a week before arriving in New Moray, which supports the idea that Cole was in a coma for several days. 2nd, the news reports never showed the beast as the cause of the disaster. On the contrary, they tried to pass it off as an unknown natural event. In addition to this, it's mentioned several times in both the guide and the story that Empire City no longer exists. Sorry, I was too lazy to look up all the mentions in the story. And the radius of the explosion is also shown in the same cutscene. Let's continue with the ICR explosion, which I honestly don't know how Balrog could have simply ignored. I'm going to elaborate on this, and why the ICR explosion is a feat of Cole, so let's get to it. Upon meeting, Wolf mentions that Cole needs to expand his abilities and become powerful enough to use the ICR. This is made clear several times. Cole needs to have enough energy, or rather, be powerful enough to activate the ICR. That's precisely what blast cores are for. They release energy to the nearest conductor, making him more powerful. This is described as a massive influx of energy. It's repeatedly stated that Cole must absorb the energy from all the blast cores to use the ICR. He must be strong enough to power it up. At one point in the story, Cole even tries to power the ICR without having enough energy and fails. In the last mission while Cole is charging the ICR, it's mentioned in the guide and implied in the cutscene that Cole is charging the ICR with his own energy, Cole's own energy. Now, many will say, hey, but Cole didn't fully charge the ICR, so this feat doesn't count for much. Actually, Cole could power on the ICR and almost succeeded. We know this because, previously, when Cole tried to power on the ICR without having enough power, it did absolutely nothing. While on this occasion the ICR proceeded trying to turn on, even appearing to drain the energy from Cole. While Cole was trying to stop the process, the ICR was already killing nearby conduits like Nyx and Quo. Quo mentioned that it was killing them. But luckily, Zeke punched the ICR out of Cole's hands with the amp. The reason why Cole couldn't fully charge it with his own energy is because one of the ICR's power regulators was damaged by Zeke's punch. This, according to the guide and Zeke himself, would cause Cole's power to directly burn the ICR. Although it is also made clear that Cole left it almost fully charged. Now that I think about it, The fact that Zeke had to use such a complex system to finish charging the ICR when it was already almost fully charged is a testament to the massive amount of energy it requires. And guess what? The ICR explosion is a massive explosion of energy. Yes, that whole explosion is essentially Cole's energy. Cole was becoming powerful enough to cause an explosion that covered the entire planet from ground level to the atmosphere. Lol, this is literally undeniable. Oh, and of course, let's not forget the beast's feat of destroying the moon. I almost forgot about that one. I suppose everyone knows about it, right? And I know you'll say, but Dante, that was done by the beast from Kessler's timeline. So what? It's the same beast, and Cole himself mentions that Kessler could still stand up to him even after the beast did that. And you'll say, but that's just Cole's interpretation. Nope. Kessler directly transferred his memories to Cole, all the memories of his life, and even in the comic we see that Kessler's consciousness lives on in Cole. Cole didn't interpret this. Kessler told him, showed him directly. And before some brain-deficient kid says dumb something like, ugh, but Kessler ran from the beast, and you don't run from a fight you can win. Therefore Kessler lied to Cole. Well, let me tell you, you little water-chewing person, that makes no sense. Not only does nothing in the plot indicate that Kessler could be lying, not even to show off because he himself has said that he considers himself a weak person, but Kessler transferred his memories to Cole. Furthermore, why would Kessler stay behind to face the beast, leaving his family unprotected in the apocalypse? I remind you that he has 2 daughters and a wife whom he tried desperately to protect, and they are the reason he fled. This is literally shown to us in the comic during Cole and Kessler's conversation. And the second reason is that Kessler don't want to be the one to defeat the beast, even if he can. He simply don't want that responsibility on his shoulders. This is made perfectly clear by the simple fact that instead of becoming stronger he made Cole stronger so he can defeat the beast. But if you still think it makes no sense for Kessler to run from responsibility, I'll have to remind you of the comic, where Cole had a moment of realization and understood that he had been running away from any important responsibility his entire life and decided to stop doing so once and for all, just before defeating, in less than a minute, an enemy he had been running from throughout the comic. But even if we throw away what the story tells us and pretend that Kessler couldn't stand up to the beast, it still doesn't matter, since the beast could destroy the moon from the moment it appeared. In summary, the flashback shows Kessler and his wife watching live news reports where the moon has already been destroyed. We know why Kessler lives in Empire and why the beast appeared in Empire. The news will broadcast the event live at the moment. You might think the government would try to hide it, but given that Kessler is happy with his family even if he is an active conduit, it's understood that in his timeline, conduits are more normalized. Oh yes, it's also curious that people ignore that both Cole and the Beast are capable of altering the weather without needing to fight or use ionic abilities.
Hey, so there was a problem with the website I use for audio and I had to change my voice. I hope you like it, sorry about that. Anyways. Now that we've touched on this and Cole AP. Let's continue with Alex's AP and first of all, the fallacy that it would have to be at least half as strong as the nuke. To begin with, we don't even really know if the Supreme Hunter would have survived the nuke. Even in the image Balrog showed, it's mentioned that the Supreme Hunter thinks he will survive, but it's never stated that he could. And even if he could, it doesn't scale Alex at the same level that far-fetched. This chubby guy was created like a cancer to kill Alex. He passed through Alex and then through Green, being born much slower but also more powerful than Alex himself, literally at birth. And he remains much more powerful than the Alex of the end, having only consumed one human canonically. This means that the Supreme Hunter should not only have much more power but also much more resistance and a power increase from consumption much greater than Alex's. Or he was wrong, and he wouldn't survive the nuke, which is actually by far the most probably. Furthermore, this might not even be related to consumption in the way we think. Things like Alex not surviving the nuke and the Hunter appearing to be an incomplete but more powerful replica of Alex himself, or the fact that his main objective seems to be consuming Alex, lead me to believe that consuming Alex could grant the Supreme Hunter a power-up far greater than average per consumption, similar to what happens in Dragon Ball with Cell and Android 17 and 18. This is actually supported by the Supreme Hunter's description, which mentions that only by consuming Alex will he be complete. Believing that Alex is at least half as strong as the nuke in either AP or durability based solely on this easily refutable dialogue and nothing more is illogical. Alex has never demonstrated a single AP or durability feat that even comes close. His highest AP feats are entirely and consistently structural, allowing him to destroy tanks in one or, at most, two attacks. Examples include Air Stomp, Blade Air Slice, Ground Spike, Hammer Fist Elbow, Hammer Toss, Blade Frenzy, Blade Sprint Frenzy, Tendril Devastator, Critical Pain Devastator, and Ground Spike Devastator. Alex has never demonstrated or even been mentioned as having a feat that surpasses this in terms of AP. Moreover, the guide itself mentions, in the penultimate mission of the game, that Alex needs to repeat a Devastator at least 2 or 3 times to destroy a medium-sized building. Yeah, Alex have to spam his most powerful attacks at least twice just to destroy a medium-sized building. But let's move on to the 2 biggest absurdities I've heard in the scaling, that Alex can move the sun and that his fight with Heller affected a cluster of clouds. You can't be that dumb or that fanatical. To begin with, never ever in any part of the story, guide, or lore is it even implied that Alex could control the weather, much less the sun in any way. It doesn't even make any sense. This animation, besides being solely a gameplay animation, isn't even something you're supposed to see. While it's happening, the player's camera remains fixed. This is just a visual effect to make Alex's transformations look cooler. That's all. It's not a feat, it's not something that's even implied anywhere that Alex could even attempt to do. It's a gameplay animation that you only realize exists if you climb a very tall building and glitch the camera. How strange, right? You have to cause a glitch to see it. It's almost as if it wasn't meant to be seen, as if it wasn't legit. Because it isn't. Saying that Alex can move the sun because of this gameplay animation that you weren't even supposed to see is literally equivalent to saying that CJ from GTA San Andreas has a planetary AP or hacks because he can change the size of the moon with a shoot in GTA San Andreas. Yes, it's exactly the same thing. Both statements are exactly equally stupid. And it's funny because, unlike Alex's animation, it's actually much easier to realize that you can change the size of the moon in the 3D GTA games. You don't have to force the camera with a glitch or anything, hahaha. Seriously, guys, ever since the death battle, you've been looking for any crumb you can find to say that Alex is stronger than Cole. And regarding the fight between Alex and James causing rain, we're in the same boat. It's just a dramatic effect that hundreds of movies and video games use in their finale plots. That's the idea Dan had in mind when writing the scene. In his own words, all scenes are more dramatic in the rain. I repeat, tell me a single instance, just one, during the story or even in the guide or Alex or James's abilities where it's even implied that they can affect the weather. Seriously, you can't show me a single canonical mention of this. Saying that fallacy is literally like saying John Wick is planetary or some other nonsense like that because sometimes when he fights other assassins it starts to rain. You completely ignore the fact that it had already started raining in the previous mission and even before. It's not unusual for rain to stop for a few minutes before starting again, lol. Adding to this the fact that the missions and cutscenes in Prototype 2 are not at all accurate with each other. I also find it curious how everyone ignores that the hole in the clouds isn't directly above where James and Heller fight, as many claim. On the contrary, they're in a corner of it. This hole is clearly and obviously just a way to show us what Heller does at the end, and that's it. It's pretty obvious, really, and even Dan confirmed it. It's obvious that neither Dan nor any writer or cinematic creator had considered that this hole, the clouds, or anything else could have been caused by the fight. Now, moving on from the fallacy about Heller and Alex becoming twice as strong with each consumed, do I really need to explain why this is nonsense? Once again, Balrog has taken one of his fanfics about his favorite edgy boy and tried to pass it off as canon without a single shred of real or even minimally logical evidence, grabbing any crumb he finds and desperately twisting it to fit the lies he wants you to believe, and calling you retarded if you don't believe what he says, what he lies. But anyway, let's debunk this by pretending it makes the slightest bit of sense and that the game itself doesn't constantly contradict it. In simple terms, if Alex doubled his strength with each power-up, nothing should be able to hurt him throughout the game, literally nothing. After a couple of consumes, he would simply become too powerful. To consider just a few examples, he needs to spam one of his most powerful attacks several times to destroy a small building by the end of the game. A group of helicopter missiles wouldn't have literally brought him to his knees halfway through the Prototype 1 story. Neither should thermobaric tanks be able to damage him, much less one-shot him at the end of the game. Obviously, regular tanks shouldn't be able to either. Not even the nuke should have destroyed him the way it did. And we're in the same boat with Heller. Even worse, reading in the guide that a troop of soldiers with rocket launchers can cause Heller big problems even in the final stages of the game, the latter being reaffirmed in BlackNet 10. Long Horizon Cargo Delivery 24K. Where Heller expresses concern that the last thing he wants is a bunch of evolved with rocket launchers. Or the fact that even halfway through the game, after consuming several evolved juggernauts and brawlers who can destroy tanks with their kamikaze explosions, Heller can't destroy APCs with his Devastator. This becomes clearer than ever when you see that in the final mission, even after consuming several regular and alpha juggernauts throughout the story, Heller can't even scratch a steel barricade. The same steel door that not only did an alpha juggernaut severely damage with a single blow, but that two regular juggernauts destroyed after a couple of minutes of pounding on it. Furthermore, the Prototype 1 guide actually states that Alex reached the limit of his evolution at the end of the game, and since you value the guide much more than the original and canon work, I suppose you should take it as absolute truth. Geez, there is literally nothing in the games, the lore, or anything else that supports that stupid made-up belief that Alex or Heller become twice as strong every time they consume someone. It doesn't even make any sense. This belief isn't supported by absolutely anything. Not only is it something Balrog literally made up to buff Alex based on lies and twisted explanations, but it's also literally the kind of scaling method an 11-year-old would use to buff their favorite character based on nothing, having to scrape together crumbs to invent evidence where there is none and make it sound convincing so that people with no reading or writing comprehension and no critical thinking skills will believe it, like with the next image. I know Balrog deliberately said, to avoid looking like an even bigger clown, that the guides, and especially the descriptions in this guide, are the absolute truth and supersede the lore, although, if that were the case, he should also have taken into account that the strike team is described as the most dangerous enemy Alex has ever faced. But the thing is, if you use your brain, you'll easily realize that this shouldn't be taken this way. Official guides, whether in a scaling or a video game analysis, should be used more as support than as a retcon. The official canon of the infamous and Prototype series is that of the games themselves because that's the original and current form of the saga, not that of the guides, which are generally not even made by people who participated in the games, as is the case with the Prototype 1 guide, which was made by David Hodgson, someone who didn't participate in any of the creation of Prototype 1. What I mean is that if an official guide directly or indirectly contradicts what's seen in the canon of the video games, then this statement shouldn't be taken into account at all, since, as I already said, the guides are more of a support than an unquestionable retcon, which is actually designed to support you almost 100% in terms of gameplay, almost never in terms of lore. No matter how much the guide mentions that some hunters possess near-genius intellects, this is not true. All the hunters Alex has encountered, except for the Supreme, are essentially animals devoid of critical thinking, with the sole exception of one leader hunter who seemed to possess a modicum of conscience. But that's about it. Furthermore, it's possible they're misinterpreting that same paragraph. When it mentions hunters possessing near-genius intelligence, it's likely referring specifically to the Supreme Hunter, who is indeed quite intelligent. Other examples of these canon errors I'm mentioning include the guide implying that Captain Cross was aware of his infection and consciously and actively aided the virus, which was likely a misunderstanding on the part of the guide's author, who probably didn't realize that the cross at the end is no longer the same cross from the beginning, but rather the Supreme Hunter. Or that, according to the guide, Alex and Dana never shared a childhood. This is despite the fact that she is supposedly 10 years younger than Alex and that Dana was born just as Alex was given to his mother, functioning more as a father figure to her. However, canonically, Dana herself mentions at the end of Prototype 2 that she and Alex shared a childhood, recalling a young Alex. Furthermore, the second text enclosed by Balrog doesn't even make sense. Within the game's canon, hunters aren't even capable of consuming like Alex does. They're always seen eating their victims to restore their vitality, just like all living beings do. And even if we turn off our brains and say the second text is an absolute truth, it never mentions how much stronger they become by killing each other. Their growth in skill and power can be interpreted more logically as them becoming more skilled and capable in combat, and becoming stronger by consuming and digesting food, like any other species in the world, not in some magical, all-powerful way that makes them go from dying from a grenade to being unharmed by a nuke in minutes by magic or something.
Allows them to keep up with the ever-evolving moving goalpost as Alex Mercer. In fact, their primary objective is to consume the prototype, meaning black-light creatures and the evolved must be capable of matching Alex's continuously growing strength.
Nope. Just because they try to get stronger to defeat Alex, or that their mission is to defeat Alex, doesn't mean they're capable of doing it. It's like saying that Blackwatch soldiers individually are capable of keeping up with Alex's power level since their mission is to kill him, and every day they try new ways to do it, and their soldiers get stronger. Or saying the same about, well, almost any enemy army in fiction. Furthermore, absolutely all the hunters we've had contact with or seen canonically have roughly the same level of durability, which never exceeds the wall level. From the possibly slightly more primitive version of the hunters from Hope, dying from normal gunshots. And explosions from both cars. And grenades. To the hunters from Prototype 1, who can die from falling debris. Or being run over by a truck, or from gunfire. Including the two special mutations from the comic, one of which appears to be a leading hunter. Both die from normal gunfire. And finally, the Prototype 2 brawlers, who are an improved version of the hunters. Like a normal brawler and an alpha brawler who die from gunfire in the comic. Or the one Heller kills with a knife. Or all the brawlers that appear in these missions and are easily killed by rifles, rocket launchers, missile launchers, tanks, or helicopters. It's strange that, according to Balrog's logic, the hunters are perfectly capable of keeping up with Alex's power growth, but canonically we haven't seen any with a resistance that surpasses the wall, right? How curious. But seriously, nobody who's played the games would say something so dumb. Do you realize that if the hunters were that powerful, not only would Hope and all the other outbreaks that Cross has dealt with would be uncontrollable, but saying that the hunters have this power would automatically make Alex just another infected of the bunch. And since we're talking about abilities invented by Balrog, how about we debunk that fabricated claim that Alex gets a power boost during the fight, like some kind of Saitama? So, the guide says the Supreme Hunter is much more powerful than Alex in both fights? Yes. Does this mean Alex gets stronger during the course of the fights? Absolutely not. This makes no sense. It's never mentioned, implied, or left unsaid in the plot, guide, gameplay, or anything. There's absolutely nothing to support the belief that Alex would do this. Furthermore, this is perfectly normal. In video games, movies, anime, and so on, there are hundreds of examples of protagonists being far less powerful than their adversaries and still winning. Whether it's due to speed, intelligence, hacks, agility, external assistance, or a combination of all of these. The clearest example of this that comes to mind right now is Raiden from Metal Gear Rising: Revenge. During the game, several bosses are clearly much more powerful and durable than Raiden himself. Like Sundowner. Or the Brazilian samurai Jetstream Sam. And the clearest example by far is Senator Armstrong. And while this is the clearest example I can think of, there are many other examples of a character or real person taking advantage of their speed or intelligence to defeat someone much stronger, more durable, or physically more powerful. Like the classic David vs. Goliath. Or Jimmy Hopkins vs. Russell. Link vs. Ganondorf. Goku vs. Jiren. Goku Shibukawa vs. Doppo Orochi. Gaia vs. Sarkovsky. Shibukawa vs. Ali Jr. Boyka vs. Koshmer. Rocky vs. Drago. Fedor vs. Hongman Choi. Fedor vs. Schilt. Fedor vs. Randleman. The first fight between Ganu, the man with the strongest punch in the world, and Stipe Miocic, in which Miocic completely dominated Francis with his fighting. Royce Gracie vs. Chemo. Gracie vs. Akabano. Ian Gary vs. Prates. Thickness vs. Musesa. Or basically any boss fight from the Resident Evil and Soulsborne sagas. All the examples I showed are, well, examples of real people or characters who took advantage of their skills, intelligence, strategy, and/or speed to face and defeat an opponent much stronger, more powerful, and more durable than themselves. Does this mean that all these real people and characters experience a power boost while fighting? Obviously not. They simply take advantage of their superior qualities over their opponent. Returning to Alex, there isn't a single line of dialogue, text, visual indicator, or anything at all in the game guide or anywhere else that indicates or even indirectly suggests that Alex became more powerful while fighting. I find it almost comical that I have to debunk this claim when there isn't a single shred of real evidence to support it. In fact, what the guide confirms, and what we can see in the gameplay, is that Alex is much faster than the Supreme Hunter, as well as possibly being much smarter and clearly more experienced in combat. The guide tells us directly and indirectly during the first and second fights that Alex's speed advantage and strategy are vital in these fights. In addition to this, the fact that it's mentioned in the guide and we see in both boss fights that military weapon shots can damage, or even completely drain the Supreme Hunter's life with grenade launcher shots, makes it very, very clear that the Supreme Hunter's speed is utter garbage compared to Alex's. Seriously, Balrog Blaze, your scaling is literally this mean. It's funny how you don't have a single argument that makes sense. Saying that Alex has a power boost or AX2 buff when consuming any living being would make sense, but since you know you're just lying, you're constantly trying to make those who doubt your lies sound like fools. Do you realize that if it were the way you're presenting it, literally nothing in the story would make sense, and the hunters would have to have a greater power boost, then Alex an even greater one, and so on in an infinite spiral? But even so, all these creatures, including Alex, are constantly kept in check by a human army from the 1960s to 2009. It makes absolutely no sense. You're simply saying what you'd like your edgy lord to be and, once again, taking crumbs to twist and spread misinformation. You didn't analyze Alex's feats to reach a conclusion, you reached a nonsensical conclusion first and then manipulated everything to make it seem real. But, interestingly, do you know who we actually see become at least physically stronger than their opponent at the end of their fight? Cole, LOL. Saying that Cole gets stronger while fighting also sounds kind of strange. But hey! At least with him we have real proof, the strength duel he has with Kessler. Oh yeah, this image isn't an argument either. To begin with, the statement Balrog mentions is a random comment from Dr. Archer at the beginning of her boss fight. And, well, that's it. A crazy, egocentric woman saying something stupid. Egocentric, and that's it, LOL. Literally 2 seconds later, she admits, disappointed, that the brawlers aren't accomplishing anything. Claiming this as proof is as dumb as saying that Sundower is undeniably invincible because he yells, "I'm invincible," during his boss fight. And regarding the other thing, the fact that the involved can react to some of James's light attacks, or that Ronald can knock him out by taking him by surprise, is precisely because James wasn't being serious and was caught off guard. On each of those occasions, Heller wasn't sure if the person he was attacking was an involved or not. Besides, Ronald isn't even a normal one. Holloway describes him as Alex's right-hand man. That a character can be overpowered, so to speak, by being distracted or taken by surprise is common in fiction. To give two quick examples, Augustine in Infamous Second Son can react and withstand the attacks and blows of Delsin and other conduits. But at the same time, she is surprised and knocked out of for a few seconds by an RPG missile fired by Reggie while she was distracted in her conversation with Delsin. Second, Peter from Ultimate Spider-Man for the PS2, who during a scene is surprised and knocked out by Silver Sable and a tranquilizer dart while his guard is down. The same Silver Sable that Peter defeats in a one-on-one fight, and the same darts that, with his guard up, only cause him a bad headache. This doesn't mean Spider-Man gets twice as strong per minute or anything like that, it simply means the plot had to go in that direction, and they used Peter's distraction as an excuse. The same goes for the Delsin scene and the Evolves. Furthermore, the guide describes the Evolved as being equal in power and only slightly faster than regular brawlers. And as we already know, regular brawlers don't go beyond wall level. Okay, now moving quickly to muscle mass, I want to clarify a couple of things about this ability. First, once again, the claim that it multiplies Alex's strength by 6 or 8 is just another fallacy among the many Balrog invents. The description of this ability specifically states that it doubles Alex's base strength, and its upgrades increase throwing and striking power. At no point does it mention multiplying by 6 or 8 or anything else, only by 2, and then that the strength increases but not multiplies again. And although these 2 points are obvious, I must emphasize that this muscle mass boost does not increase the attacks of other powers, since it only multiplies Alex's base strength, and abilities like Hammer Fist are more powerful. And this power obviously could not multiply Alex's reaction speed in any way, that makes no sense. How could an ability that multiplies Alex's base striking and lifting strength also multiply his reaction speed? It's literally impossible, it makes no sense. If anything, his displacement speed might increase if we theorize that he can apply this to his legs and run faster, but only in that way. Again, I apologize for jumping from one topic to another. Remember, this is basically my second video, and I'm not exactly an expert screenwriter. Besides, I wrote this entire script in reaction to Balrog's video. Now then, I'd like to answer a question Balrog asked in his video regarding the veracity of Cole and Alex being able to affect the weather. Why wouldn't Alex be able to move the sun or alter storms, despite having, in quotes, several feats, but Cole would be able to summon a storm despite having fewer feats of weather manipulation? And I answer, easy, from the context. Alex's supposed feats of moving the sun or clouds are one gameplay animation that you're not supposed to see and is only there for a cool effect, which for some reason Balrog counted as 7 feats, even though it's literally the same animation. And a storm that was there before the final fight in Prototype 2 to make it more dramatic, and a hole in it so players could see what was happening. It is never stated, hinted at, or even implied in the lore or nothing that Alex or James have the ability to move the sun, change the Earth's rotation, or even control the weather. Never. Give me one instance. 1. What you're using as feats are just artistic choices to make the gameplay or fights look better. It doesn't even make sense. How could a virus that manipulates flesh, made to mimic junk DNA from biological beings, move the sun or alter the weather? As I already said, saying that Alex is capable of altering the sun or the moon is literally equivalent to saying that Carl Johnson, Claude Speed, and Tommy Vercetti are capable of altering the size of the moon, or that the protagonist of Altered Beast can alter reality or the weather because similar things happen in his transformation animations. On the other hand, Cole invoking the power of a storm is canonical. It's something that's intentionally included for you to see, it happens within the canon, it's mentioned that it occurs, and it's part of the lore that Cole can do it, even in parts of the story where he absolutely has to in order to progress. It's not something you weren't supposed to see. It's something that's legitimately there, that was made with the intention of being seen, and that makes sense. Cole literally has an attack called Ionic Storm, which consists of summoning a storm. Seriously, which seems more believable to you? To say that a character has control over the weather because of an animation that requires glitching the camera while standing on top of a building, and a hole in the clouds that's clearly there to show what's happening, something that doesn't occur never else. Or to say that a character can alter the weather because, canonically, a set of clouds is created every time the protagonist uses two canonical attacks, a tornado and a lightning strike from the sky, with an attack literally called Ionic Storm, and that to see both sets of clouds you just have to look up with the camera free. We need to scale based on the actual feats the author intended us to see in their work, Balrog, not on pointless calculations and design decisions that had little or nothing to do with the character's levels when the game was made. Otherwise, we'll end up as confused as Balrog when he tried to do his scaling without using his brain. Alex has stellar AP because he can move the sun in a gameplay animation, but at the same time, he says that Alex should have half the AP of Nuke at the end of the game. Please make up your mind, Balrog. Should Alex be city level or stellar? Who cares? Both are fallacies made by an impartial fanatic who just wants to lick the boots of his edgy lord while lying to his followers' faces. But, what if we do the same count of weather manipulation feats that Balrog did, only this time we take into account the real and canonical occasions in which Cole, and, in addition, the Beast, were able to alter the weather. Considering that Balrog counted Alex's animation as if it were 7 different feats instead of a single animation, I suppose there won't be a problem with me taking the different occasions in which Cole canonically uses the Ionic Storm as different feats, right? Let's take a look. The first time he did something like this was right at the beginning of the game when he summoned a small storm that destroyed the bridge connecting the historic district to the Neon District. I know Balrog says he doesn't consider this a feat of Cole's, but come on, it's obvious Cole caused this. The lightning doesn't strike until his powers go out of control. He holds the electricity in his hands while the lightning strikes, like when he uses the Ionic Storm, and it doesn't stop until Cole passes out. After that, when he first obtained the Ionic Storm and the game prompts you to use it twice. The 4 times he's forced to use it against the balloon shields. The other 3 times the Ionic Storm is used to destroy 3 antennas. When it's used to destroy 2 turrets attacking John's helicopter. When he defeats Kessler. The fact that Cole can alter the weather in Empire City depending on the karma he chooses to follow, turning the sky into a semi-clear blue sky or into hellish clouds. When he used the Ionic Storm in the comic. The 2 times Cole used the Ionic Storm at the beginning of Infamous 2. The Ionic Vortex. When Cole draws energy from a storm. The other 2 times he uses the Ionic Storm near the end of the game. This last one has the added bonus of mentioning that Cole used the full power of the skies in the attack, interpret that however you want. And finally, the Beast who can summon a set of black and red clouds simply by being present, without needing to fight. These clouds not only reach the horizon but are also in constant motion, meaning they encompass much more than that. This leaves us with 21 canonical feats for Cole and 3 for the Beast. It's incredible how Balrog can have the nerve to omit these canonical feats but readily accept any non-canonical crumb about Alex. And well, to finish this section, I'd like to show some of the statements from Prototype's guide regarding Alex's AP. How his kicks towards the end of the game are weaker than a presumably wall-level attack and only minimally damage helicopters. This aligns quite well with the Prototype 2 prologue when Alex charges a kick and only deflects a helicopter. The guide also mentions that Alex's claws are only as strong as rocks. The statement I already showed about having to spam his ultimate several times to destroy a medium-sized building. That, according to the guide, Alex reached his potential limit in Prototype 1. That, according to the guide, a hunter who can be killed by throwing a truck at them twice is a very difficult fight for Alex. Or that the Streak team is the most powerful enemy Alex has faced. All things that, for some strange reason, Balrog forgot to mention in his video. How curious, isn't it? Anyway, now, let's move on to the durability section. To begin with Cole's durability, we must make something very clear. His durability scales directly with his AP. This is a fundamental principle of power scaling and is something the infamous series also takes account. In Dr. White's Dead Drops, he states, while speaking with a Wehrmacht soldier, that upon receiving powers, his body will destroy itself trying to contain them. This is telling us directly that a conduit's durability must be proportional to their AP or power, because otherwise their body and mind would wear down trying to contain it, forcing them to become bigger, more monstrous, and insane. This is seen directly with every faction enemy in the series. Absolutely all the forced conduit enemies that Cole fights are physically bigger than normal enemies. The best example of this is precisely the Wehrmacht soldiers. They mutate, transforming from human bodies into monstrosities, with forms that no longer seem human. The more powerful they become, at the same time, their minds deteriorate. There is other evidence that the power of conduits like Cole directly affects their bodies. Like Cole having to stress his body to use his powers, which directly means that his own power affects and stresses his body.
Some of your dormant powers.
Alright, how do I activate them?
I think the key is to stress your body by using your powers in different ways.
Or that all of Cole's abilities cover his body in electricity and each of his shots has recoil. These are both further proof that the conduit's power directly affects their durability. This is something the lore practically throws in your face. If their durability weren't on the same level as their AP, every single conduit would go insane and die from the strain of maintaining their powers. Their durability needs to be relative to their AP. All the conduits possess superhuman physical characteristics. Nyx can withstand Cole's attacks, and Cole can too. The same goes for Bertrand, Kessler, Sasha, David, Alden, Beast, Delsin, Fetch, Eugene, and Augustine. They can all withstand each other's attacks. If this weren't the case, they'd literally all be one-shotting each other. And by the way, this image as an argument falls apart on its own. Cole literally implies at the beginning of Infamous 1 that he was already inside a car that exploded because of him. Furthermore, it's illogical to think that the explosion of a normal car could kill Cole. But his grenades, capable of creating a hole in the surface of an aircraft carrier, or his rockets, capable of doing the same from inside, only cause him some damage. And speaking of cars, going to the car crash at the beginning of Infamous 2, you're again making the mistake of not analyzing the context of the scene, not only the fact that this scene obviously wasn't made for scaling, but for the plot to advance without taking into account power levels and durability. In that scene, Cole has just spent a considerable amount of time on top of a car where he can't recharge his energy, draining it with gunfire and grenades, possibly to the point of depletion. And as we know, not being charged makes conduits weaker to the point where, with an empty tank, Cole can barely see or stand up. Then, he has to withstand the crash, the enormous explosion of the truck, and the fact that the Beast tries to communicate telepathically with him, which we see in the scene itself, causes him a lot of pain. Although, to be honest, even if the scene makes sense given the context, it's more than obvious that this scene was only included to advance the plot, and at no point did they take into account the durability Cole has shown. But anyway, let's see what else Balrog has to offer so we can disprove that.
I guess no one understands the ray sphere wasn't a bloody bomb, but a wave of radiational energy. Take your pick.
Oh.
It was like a bomb. 5, 6 city blocks reduced to rubble.
Well, that was easy. Unless you consider Balrog's lies to supersede what the lore and John White's statements tell us. If so, you should stop watching this video. Besides this, the lore repeatedly shows us that the ray sphere actually functions as a bomb. In the comic, guide, cinematic OE just logic. Furthermore, radiation alone doesn't do that, it's not capable of destroying buildings and city blocks like a nuke. If it were, Chernobyl would be in a worse state than Hiroshima after Little Boy. The fact that the ray sphere produces radiation doesn't mean that's its entire function. It's literally like reducing a nuke explosion to saying it's just heat or just radiation. The ray sphere explosion was exactly that, an explosion, and surviving it is a real feat by Cole that must be taken into account. Kessler's concern about whether Cole would survive is further proof, in addition to the many I've already given. The idea that, Kessler had never properly tested the ray sphere and therefore didn't know if it was harmful or not, is a misconception. Kessler knew perfectly well what he was capable of, as he experienced it firsthand in his own timeline. We know for certain that it existed in his timeline, since Cole directly confirms, when Kessler's memories were implanted, that Kessler simply accelerated the creation process. Remember that in the PS3 games, the ray sphere was the only way to become a main conduit, meaning Kessler would have had to obtain his powers through the ray sphere. Even the fact that David was subjected to controlled, low-exposure tests, with a mini-bunker between Kessler and the tests, simply indicates that Kessler already knew that the ray sphere functioned as it did in its original timeline and was extremely dangerous for conduits and humans, even with a controlled release. But anyway, let's look at some of Cole's many other durability feats that Balrog omits from his videos. Like how his skin is able to absorb to the detonation of firearms or bullets. Or how in the cinematic he doesn't seem affected by the impact of an RPG missile when he first sees Alden. He also withstood being crushed, punched, and thrown several meters by David Warner, who could easily pierce and cut in half 2 mutants of a possible building level. In addition to standing a concentrated attack of David's energy. The same energy that, when dispersed and accidentally, can pierce and destroy people. The same energy that easily destroyed the mini-bunker where David was imprisoned. A feat he supposedly accomplished with the tank almost empty, since the first thing he does upon emerging is feed, and in Moya's words, he should already be dead. And finally Cole can also withstand attacks from the beast. Like when John tries to crush it with his bare hands. Considering the beast's size and strength, it easily destroys buildings and creates craters in concrete just by walking over it. We can quickly calculate that this is easily a city block to multi-city block feat in Cole's durability. Furthermore, Cole can withstand the beast's pseudo-black holes. Yes, this is something he canonically do, it's a mechanic at the end of Infamous 2 and is also mentioned in the guide. These semi-black holes have been scaled by the community as being multi-continental in scale, but even if you don't like that, it's still mentioned in the guide, and we see in the mechanics that the beast concentrates all its power and energy in its hands to create these vortices. This would scale Cole's durability directly to the level of the beast's AP and power. Once again, all these feats were ignored by Balrog and his need to force the narrative to make a few fools believe that Cole is a glass cannon. It's funny how all these are feats I just remember. But Balrog, who supposedly researched every last page of every guide and every last corner of the lore, couldn't remember to include these feats when making his video. Anyway, let's look at the durability section regarding Alex. And let's start by clarifying something, the power of the nuke at the end of Prototype 1. I know, most Prototype fans disregard the nuke's actual power and try to argue, through lies and misrepresentations, that its power is much greater than it really is. But the truth is, no. The nuke's power isn't several megatons. The Prototype 1 credits tell us outright that it has a calculated power 5 times bigger than the Hiroshima bomb. The experts in the news report say so directly, and this is clearly the writer's way of telling us the nuke's real power. That's its real power, not the several megatons they invent without proof. Speaking of proof, let's look at it. Going to less conclusive arguments, since Firebreak is the same protocol used in Hope, it should have the same power. As was used on that occasion to wipe out a town, and the missile is actually quite similar to the real-life MGM-52 Lance nuclear missile. Furthermore, a 75 or 100 kiloton missile would easily cover the area we see the missile cover in the ending of Nuke when it loses to the Ultimate Hunter. And in fact, if we take the blast wave into account, it would destroy most of the infected area of Manhattan. Now, moving beyond speculation and to irrefutable evidence, the Prototype 1 missile is a tactical nuclear weapon. This is confirmed in the cinematic where Ragland implies that he is capable of using Firebreak to eradicate the infection. Right after this, he leaves a document on the table titled Tactical Nuclear Weapon Protocols. This is supported and confirmed by the game's wiki as well as by Alex Mercer himself in the comic. And what are tactical nuclear weapons? Well, They are low-yield nuclear weapons designed for use in the middle of the battlefield at a safe distance from Allied troops. Does that sound familiar? Of course it does, it's exactly the situation at the end of Prototype 1. So yeah, the nuke was indeed of the power mentioned in the Prototype 1 credits. Even if we try to be generous, we could give it a power of 100 kilotons, but no more, and this is literally irrefutable. And by the way, even if that weren't the case, Alex received less than 1% of the nuke's blast, perhaps only its shockwave. In the game over when Alex dies, we see how the explosion reaches its full power in a little over 4 to 5 seconds, depending on how you interpret the scene. With Alex, on the other hand, the nuke's blast takes a little over 4.5 seconds to reach him. Furthermore, when the blast hit him, instead of the helicopter evaporating as it would with the explosion itself, it was pushed like it would be by the nuke's shockwave. Interesting, isn't it? And even after only receiving that, Alex ended up completely destroyed, surviving only because of his regenerative abilities and because there was a crone nearby that he was able to consume. But let's look at some other facts about Alex Mercer's durability. I know I should probably include this at the end of the durability section, but let's see. Things like the fact that, canonically, Alex's skin isn't bulletproof or resistant to blunt objects, or at least not without the armor. This statement is supported by both Prototype 1 and 2, where we see several scenes where Alex is pierced by gunfire and James Heller's military knife. And I know some of you think Alex can harden or soften his skin so bullets don't penetrate him. And to those who think this nonsense, I'd like to ask, what are you basing that on? What on earth is the armor for then? If Alex could harden his skin without needing the armor, then the armor wouldn't even exist. Even the guide states that the armor serves precisely to make Alex bulletproof. Oh, anyway. The guide also mentions that a grenade launcher severely damages Alex, which explains why Alex protects himself from one in the introduction. Let's also remember that Alex was brought to his knees by ordinary missiles that didn't even destroy a construction site in Prototype 1. Furthermore, in the last 2 missions of the game, Alex himself admits, and the guide confirms, that if he even tries to approach the aircraft carrier, its missiles would blow him to bits on first contact. And canonically, as I already showed, a thermobaric missile also blows him to bits on first contact in gameplay, and this is confirmed by the guide. Moving on to Prototype 2 with Heller, we see that he, like Alex, has the same problems. Like how a group of soldiers with rocket launchers can pose a real problem for him. Or the same with Evolved's. Or mainly, in Mission 21, a fly in the ointment, after consuming the Blackwatch commanders in charge of Operation Firehawk, James calls Dana and tells her that if Firehawk is launched, it will destroy Manhattan and kill everyone, including him, Maya, and Dana. Of course, you could argue, hey, but that bombardment would have targeted all of New York, not just Manhattan. So James's durability would have scaled to that. Nah, not really. It's not just that Heller doesn't find out until the next mission that the bombardment would extend beyond Manhattan, but this is a bombardment, not a nuke. A bombardment means gradual destruction, not instantaneous. So yes, Heller was worried about the thermobaric missiles, admitting they would kill him. At this point, James is already at his peak power, at his full potential according to the guide. Also, if you're near one of these missiles in the next mission, it will completely drain James's life. Again, I couldn't get the clip, sorry. And you'll get an instant death if you're near the thermobaric missile reserves when you destroy them. Not to mention that someone with such poor AP as Heller was able to defeat Mercer. Although I'll touch on that in the next debunk. Well, I'm not going to lie, I was going to post an clip from Balrog, but it's too long, so. In short, Balrog argues that since Alex is the peak of Blackwatch and the most powerful of the infected, this should put his durability above Goliath's. But this isn't true. Being more powerful doesn't mean being more durable, not at all. It would only mean that Alex's AP is higher than Goliath's, which isn't as much as you might imagine if you realize that the only 2 AP feats by a Goliath are making a building shake, but not actually destroying it, at the beginning of Prototype 2. cause a small tremor that can be attributed more to its size and weight than its raw power. And since we're debunking the Goliath, Balrog also argues with this image that the Goliath must be durably resistant to a nuke since it can't be eliminated by common weapons, or that its durability is stellar because of Heller's AP, blah blah blah. And I respond that this only applies to James and other evolved since their AP is low enough compared to his other stats that he can't destroy tanks with his Devastator or even dent a steel barricade, even using Hammer Fist, which greatly enhances his attacks. This would mean they would have to dismantle the Goliaths piece by piece. Furthermore, it's obvious that by conventional weapons, they mean weapons like machine guns, grenade launchers, etc. Whereas common tanks and helicopters could damage and even kill a Goliath, which would make much more sense and is demonstrated in the game. It's incredibly foolish to think the guide would consider nukes like basic weapons. Even if Blackwatch can use them, they're still not their standard weapons, otherwise, they'd be throwing nukes around indiscriminately. Common weapons here, in Rome, IB China, and for any country or person, are pistols, rifles, shotguns, and so on. But what about the instances where Goliaths have been killed? What about the mission BlackNet 9? Spotted Cat Gentech Support 14A, where we see the corpse of a Goliath that Blackwatch killed? How do we know that the Evolved or Alex had nothing to do with it? Simply put, Blackwatch was creating a way to track Heller and kill him with a predator antigen, created using the DNA of this Goliath. This would harm not only Heller but also anyone infected with the virus. Dana mentions that the area is heavily guarded and no one can access it without authorization. Furthermore, if this were related to the Evolved, there would be at least one at the end of the mission, as happens in, well, all the missions where the Evolved are involved. So yeah, Blackwatch killed a Goliath. Later, in Infected Salvage 8D. In Corporal Kevin Dula's flashback, we see that it seems Blackwatch has killed another Goliath while he's ordered to aim at it in case something goes wrong, and the soldier has a psychotic break, saying it's like the corpse is watching him. Anyway, later in the mission, we're informed that Blackwatch managed to neutralize and capture a Goliath and reports it for capture. And no, it's not the same Goliath, since the convoy announces it as if it were something recent, and they're several city blocks away from where the corporal was. Plus, it's implied that this is the first time they've captured a Goliath, so the one in the corporal's memory was undoubtedly dead. And well, as a final point, the guide literally tells us we can kill a Goliath with a helicopter in Mission 22B. So, even if Alex's durability scaled to that of the Goliath, it wouldn't be a big deal, although, as I already mentioned, Alex's durability doesn't scale with the Goliaths. And now that we've finished talking about this, let's move quickly to the speed section. The section with Cole will be brief. While I agree to some extent with the speed given to Cole, I do so for different reasons than the arguments presented by Balrog, but I'll address that when I make a specific video about Cole's scaling. Right now, I want to debunk two specific things as quickly as possible. First, scaling Cole with the speed of the Ice Soldier's lasers is highly questionable. During the game, Cole can't dodge them when they're fired. He dodges the Ice Soldier's aim. And second, this attack from Kessler, this is electricity. No matter how much they deny it, it looks like electricity, it acts like electricity, it sounds like electricity, it is electricity. The story establishes that Kessler is Cole who traveled through time, but it's exactly the Cole we know, only older. That's canon, regardless of how many mistakes the guide has in discussing this. The guide isn't a reinterpretation, a retcon, or the absolute truth. It doesn't define the game's history, the games do. If the games say Kessler is Cole, then Kessler is Cole, period. The worst part is that even the statement that Kessler's attack is pure energy can still be interpreted as a pure electrical energy attack, since electricity is a type of energy. Honestly, that's all I want to say for now about Cole's speed, so let's talk about Alex's. Anyway, let's move quickly to debunk the Elizabeth Green orbs. You know, Dan said they aren't pure energy, and their speed would be like that of a baseball being hit. Besides, it doesn't make much sense for Elizabeth to create energy or Alex move at that speed. Furthermore, these types of attacks were initially just called infection. Anyway, I'm just going to highlight 2 or 3 things that don't make sense. Things like Alex admitting that if he gets near the aircraft carrier at the end of the game, its missiles will blow him to bits, or how in previous missions we see him running at a normal speed and having difficulty catching a hunter, or how during the comic he has to perform several acrobatics to escape a helicopter, are things that tell us right in our faces that Alex couldn't even dream of having that speed. Besides, the guide itself literally gives us a combat plan to attack Elizabeth with a helicopter, which means that, well, undoubtedly a helicopter can dodge these. It's clear that calling these attacks energy was just something the guide writer did to save time researching what this attack actually is. If you pay attention to the games, you'll realize that these orbs are almost identical to the genetic orbs Alex consumes to restore his health and unlock new abilities. These same orbs are also called energy by the guide writer, even though the lore tells us directly, mainly in Karen Parker's missions, that these orbs are genetic material. Karen even drops these same orbs whenever she's momentarily defeated. If we connect the dots, it becomes obvious that these green orbs are toxic genetic material that Green uses to attack Alex. This is reinforced by the fact that we've already seen in Prototype 2 that toxic material can kill prototypes and evolved, ignoring their regenerative abilities. Best, it's stupid to think that Alex could even reach that speed but still be controlled by a human army, it just doesn't make sense. Just like this.
What I'm talking about is the lightning meta. So as it goes, Goliaths can attack with lightning fast attacks. Now James can physically outrun a Goliath even without being infected. No AMs, nothing.
I'm not even going to be tactful here. If you truly believe this and can't distinguish an exaggeration from something literal, you simply don't have a functioning brain, it's that simple. It's a miracle you don't argue that the tendrils attack called Black Hole is an undeniably real black hole just because of the attack's name. You have to have the intelligence of a newborn to believe that a simple, normal, unmodified human soldier can suddenly, from one second to the next, magically run at lightning speed to escape a creature that also magically runs at lightning speed, even though it can be reached and killed by missiles. Sometimes I'm surprised Balrog even has any credibility. But hey, since I know you guys don't usually think, I'll just say that I find it curious that human James couldn't escape at super speed from the cell where he was imprisoned, nor could he dodge an attack from a normal human. Although, I wouldn't be surprised if Prototype fanboys like Balrog argued that absolutely all normal humans in Prototype have lightning-fast movement and reaction speeds just to justify their brainless nonsense. That would make weapons and vehicles pointless, though. But hey, logic doesn't matter in Prototype, right? Seriously though, if anyone here thinks this guy has lightning speed, then I invite them to get up from their chair, leave their house, and find their brain cells wherever they left them last time, if they even understand the concept of searching, of course. Anyway, let's continue with this nonsense.
Elizabeth Green absorbing all her knowledge. This is crucial because according to her character profile in the Prana Guide, Green possesses an intellect that spans billions of years.
Oh yes, Green's argument about billions of years. Actually, I have several arguments to refute that this applies to Alex's reaction time. To begin with, and the most obvious and simple, the guide says that Green has an intellect of billions of years, not memories of them. Intellect refers to cognitive ability, reasoning, comprehension, learning, creativity, problem solving, etc. While memories, by definition, are the stored content, lived experiences, acquired knowledge, events, emotions. They are the archive that the intellect can consult or use. Elizabeth canonically has 50 years of life, so she can only have a maximum of 50 years of personal memories. Having an intellect of billions of years means that her mental capacity is far superior to that of a human being, like a supercomputer. Intellect does not depend on the time lived, but on the volume and quality of cognitive processing. An artificial intelligence, to take an example, could process the equivalent of decades of intellectual capacity in a couple of minutes, but that doesn't mean it would also develop the same amount of memories, even if it were capable of doing so. Secondly, even if Alex had processed all that knowledge into memories, this would be a feat of neural processing that wouldn't be reflected in his physical speed, reaction time, or anything else. It's like saying that because you've lived decades in a dream, this will be reflected in your physical speed. There have been real-life cases like Alpha Kabeja or Eben Alexander, who have experienced decades of life in a couple of days while in a coma. That doesn't give them subsonic speed, much less anything superior. To say that Alex's physical speed is equal to his neural processing speed or even his perception speed is nonsense. To make such a claim, you need proof. I don't have to refute it because it's nonsensical and there's no evidence whatsoever. You have to prove it, Balrog Blaze, and you haven't provided a single piece of real evidence. Saying that Mercer's reaction speed is equal to his processing speed is like saying a robot can move at relativistic speeds because it can process centuries of information in minutes. In the third instance, Alex doesn't see all the memories of those he consumes. There's ample evidence of this, from a couple of statements in the guides to Alex's own words in the comic mentioning that he only gets a small taste of the memories of those he consumes. This also implies that he investigated this guy, since he consumed his henchman, and if he saw all of his memories, he wouldn't even need to investigate him. Or consider the damn fact that in the third mission of Prototype 1, Alex consumes the guy who literally riddled the original Alex with bullets, and yet he doesn't find out what happened until the mission, Shock and Awe, where McMullen tells him and he shoots himself. But Dante, what if they're not the same person? It's literally the same guy. There are only two people in suits and gloves in all of Prototype 2, and both were there when Alex released the virus. They even have the same type of lips, cheeks, eyebrows, and the same hearing aid in their left ear. Plus, when Alex consumes it, he finds out that he's the guy they sent to kill from the beginning. So yeah, it's undeniable that they're the same person. Anyway, that's just one of many examples that happened during the missions, which I'll be listing here.
Second, maybe even less. We've seen time and again that when Alex consumes people, he instantly gains their knowledge, as demonstrated in both Stealth Consumes and the comics.
Actually, I don't think that's the case. It's possible that Alex simply chooses not to get flashbacks of the memories of those he consumes, and sometimes just consumes the person without further ado. The times that Alex has canonically consumed someone to obtain information, both he and James seem to suffer immense pain for a few seconds, while on occasions when he doesn't want to obtain any memories, he simply consumes the person and that's it. Furthermore, their first consumption is like that. The first time Alex consumes a soldier, he doesn't see their memories. It's not until the second time that he sees flashbacks of the soldier. More or less the same thing happened with James, who didn't see anything in his first two consumptions until Alex taught him to see flashbacks of the people he consumes. This indicates that it's a complicated process that requires concentration and intention.
Meet Blackwatch Lieutenant Mark Simon. Let it happen. Let it come to you. Let the truth sink in.
Can hit people with electricity that move faster than lightning. But nonetheless, Cole isn't one of them, unfortunately.
I'm just mentioning that some of Cole's abilities are kinetic energy, so his speed could vary, especially with rockets. And well, it's time to address the hacks section.
Two that have carapaces that can deflect the bolts themselves, like the Ravagers and Devourers. So why does this matter for Alex? Well, because Alex can pretty much do what they can do with his shield and armor.
Well, I actually quite agree on this occasion, although I should add that, as with the aforementioned enemies, this would only work if Cole only uses his regular bolts. Any other attack Cole directs at Alex could still wipe him out, just like it does with these same creatures, whether it's rockets, grenades, shockwaves, gigawatt swords, normal punches, a more concentrated bolt like the Magnum Beam, the Ionic Storm, or precision shots, which, even though they're electrical, still damage Ravagers, and so on.
Generation depending on two things. One, if you believe like I do that Alex can regenerate from a single molecule, to truly kill the Black Light virus, you must destroy all traces at the molecular level, as Alex can manipulate his molecules and infect on that scale, so he should be able to regenerate on that level. Or, alternatively, if you accept that Alex can manipulate his atoms and recreate.
Or what if we stick to canon and agree that Alex only rebuilds his body down to a cellular level? I think it's better to believe what the canon says than to be guided by a design artist or a fake chat.
Comparing his regeneration to that of the mutated Ice Titans is a false equivalency, as Cole isn't shown or stated to have the same kind of regenerational properties as them.
Wow, I never thought you'd complain about an equivalence fallacy considering that literally all your scaling is based on it. Anyway, Cole should have regeneration equivalent to that of the Iceman, given that forced conduits receive only a tiny fraction of the power of the conduit they receive from the machine, while primary conduits like Cole receive 86% of the other conduit's capacity and powers. The reason the Vermac mutate to obtain these abilities is, as I said at the beginning of the video, how their bodies try to withstand and enhance this power without dying. This is a problem that conduits like Cole don't have, since they can receive all this power and these abilities without any issues.
You fool, that's not conventionally what he can regenerate from. He needed help from the Corvid. My. Are you sure about that? Well, for the second piece of evidence, let me show you the Supreme Hunter, who without biomass regenerated from a blood puddle. Now yes, we don't see the whole process, but from how quickly he regenerated his hand, we can say at worst, little over a minute. As for...
Oh, what is this? An equivalence fallacy? How curious, a second ago you were complaining about them. This almost makes you seem like a hypocrite, doesn't it? Anyway, the fact that the Supreme Hunter can regenerate from a pool of blood without the help of biomass doesn't mean in any way that Alex is capable of doing so as well, since, as we have seen so far, the Supreme Hunter is essentially an improved or superior version of Alex himself, who only seems to fall short in speed. Alex did depend on the Crow to regenerate. He literally went from being kilometers away from Manhattan to being a few meters from New York. This only means that he spent hours in that state being carried solely by the tide without being able to regenerate until he reached the shore of Manhattan, where, surrounded by garbage, he still couldn't regenerate until the Crow appeared to save him. If Alex could truly regenerate like the Ultimate Hunter, he simply would have done so during all those hours without needing a miracle like the Crow that saved his life. The Crow scene literally wouldn't have existed if that were the case. Furthermore, the ending of Prototype 2 literally shows us that without accumulated biomass, Alex can no longer regenerate even his arms. So, dear viewer, if you believe Alex is capable of regenerating like the Supreme Hunter, congratulations. You swallowed a complete fallacy of equivalence with balls and all. Now, I'd like to talk about consumption. For some reason, Prototype fans believe that Alex can consume a living being without weakening or killing it, based on a single isolated feat, but this isn't even remotely true. There are several statements that Alex has to kill or at least weaken his enemies to consume them. I mean, it's not just the guide that state this. Literally every single consumption in the game, without exception, eliminates the target before consuming them, regardless of the weapon or ability used. But anyway, let's look at clearer examples like Alex's statements in the comic, or the fact that Alex couldn't consume Supreme Hunters at first because they have 2 spines and 2 brains, and destroying the first one doesn't kill them. That's why he has to destroy both every time he consumes them. You even see this in the damn animation, where the first time Alex tries to kill them like normal hunters by crushing one of their brains, and the second time he crushes both, but whatever. We also have a couple of statements from the guide. Or the time Alex tried to consume James, but James resisted Alex's attempt.
Kill me.
Even when he consumes 8 of his evolved, we can argue that they were too weak. For example, Galloway, who was among them, seemed scared of facing an APC and had never fought anything before. Furthermore, Alex doesn't seem to simply consume them, he kills them beforehand. I mean, when Alex or James consumes something or someone already weakened, it takes them 1-2 seconds at most each time. But here, Alex took 10 seconds to even begin consuming them. 10 seconds in which the evolved, and especially Galloway, scream in agony as they are impaled and massacred by Alex. Galloway even begs James for help, something no one has ever been able to do while being consumed, not soldiers, not Elizabeth, not even the evolveds before. In this scene, Alex is clearly murdering the evolveds before finally consuming them.
He made a rather convincing argument that because Alex isn't technically alive, he wouldn't be producing bioelectricity, so Cole wouldn't be able to find him.
This doesn't work like that. To begin with, what the virus did was reanimate Alex's body. Alex's body would look like a rotting corpse even with the virus if he hadn't been reanimated. Furthermore, his systems, like his intestines, stomach, nervous system, etc., continue to function fully, as we see when he vomits due to the cancer in the morgue and then faints for a few minutes. Or in the fact that in the web of intrigue, we see Alex's neurons, which, to no one's surprise, are still functioning. And even if you don't consider this last point, the fact is that Alex has cells and muscles, and in simple terms, cells produce electricity. The same electricity that the body's muscles need to move. Muscles contract due to electrical signals that come from the nerves. Without this electrical potential, no muscle moves, no matter what. In other words, without bioelectricity, Alex's body wouldn't even move. Basic biology. It's becoming very obvious that you guys are literally taking any crumb you can find to make it falsely seem like Cole doesn't stand a chance against Alex. You guys should try to be a little more subtle. Okay, so now let's address Alex's supposed adaptation to electricity. It's a bit complicated for me to address this because I feel that by debunking the nonsense of the X2 for each consumption and Mercer adapting while fighting, I've already debunked a large part of this fanfic. But anyway, I'll try to add more and refute some of the arguments Balrog presented, like with this image, which doesn't serve as proof of adaptation. This image doesn't mention anything like that, and we can attribute Heller becoming stronger to the fact that he consumed at least 2 soldiers and a couple of infected to recover his full health and biomass bar, which we know does make him a little stronger each time. This other image also doesn't serve as an argument for several reasons. First, these strains are, so to speak, subviruses that come from Blacklight itself and are not compatible with each other. Furthermore, they have nothing to do with durability, defense, AP, or anything related to who generates them. Literally, in that same dialogue, it's mentioned that most of the variants are harmless, they are sub-viruses. Secondly, because in that memory from the Web of Intrigue, the scientists are talking about Green. You can easily tell this since it mentions that they are examining her in a laboratory, and as we know, Alex was never subjected to this. And thirdly, Alex is actually infected with one of these variants, specifically the DX1118 variant, which is completely different from the other variants or from Green's abilities in general. It's even mentioned in a memory from the Web of Intrigue that Elizabeth once generated 14 variants of DX1118 itself. Elizabeth does create variants of the virus constantly, but this doesn't mean that Alex does, since he is a variant of the virus itself. Another example of these variants is the DX1120 variant, which is used to create the super soldiers. All these variants have different functions than Blacklight. Anyway, I still find it funny how some people think Mercer adapts while fighting, that he quickly adapts to anything you throw at him, or the most idiotic have even told me that if he takes a single attack from something, he can automatically become almost immune to it, no matter how many times it comes. But we only have to look at what's shown in the game itself to realize that's not the case. For example, when leaving the morgue at the beginning of the game, a group of soldiers shoots Alex, passing right through him. A couple of missions later, it's mentioned that Alex isn't bulletproof. Towards the end of the game, he is shot again and the bullet passes through him once more. Even the comics show the same thing. The same applies to explosions, and it's even easier to disprove. Simply put, in one of the first missions, he gets hit in the face with a C4 explosion. Halfway through the game he's hit by a missile barrage and left on his knees, and at the end of the game, the aircraft carrier missiles and thermobaric bombs instantly kill him. Normal tanks still damage him, and the nuke completely destroys him. There's also the nonsense about the blood tox, which some people believe Alex became immune to. But nah, to begin with, his first interaction with it is in the mission, Men's Like Gods. On day 11. In the final cutscene, Alex breathes in blood tox for a few seconds and then leaves the room, reaching the larger interior area where he's constantly in contact with it for a few seconds. Then, in the very next mission, A Dream of Armageddon, on day 12, Alex destroys several blood tox dispensers placed all over Lower Manhattan. He destroys and comes into contact with about 9 of them, and they continue to damage him. One mission after that, Alex may come into contact with blood tox when consuming a soldier to guard a blood tox pumping device. And finally, in the mission, Full Shock. Even after considerable contact with blood tox previously, Alex is still severely affected by it, to the point where the guide describes facing regular soldiers while near blood tox as suicidal. And yeah, Cross does mention to Alex that he's developing immunity to blood tox, but considering that since the previous mission he's no longer Cross but the Supreme Hunter, it's quite possible that this was just a trap to convince Alex to practically commit suicide. Other prof is that when Alex recklessly jumps into tanks full of blood tox and they explode in his face, Alex is left on the brink of death even though the blood tox dissipates into the air. And yes, he is left on the brink of death and knocked unconscious, he's not faking it. We know this because a super soldier uses a virus detection device to determine if it's safe to take Alex, the same detection devices that can canonically detect the virus at less than 10 parts per million in open spaces. So yes, DX-1118 was disappearing from Alex's body. And the most obvious proof that this adaptability is, at the very least, very overrated, I think, is the Supreme Hunter in the form of cancer and how Alex was dying from it. So let's recap. In the mission Errand Boy, after a fight with Captain Cross, Alex is infected with a cancer virus to which he cannot adapt. He spends several missions and about 4 days infected with it, unable to use his most powerful abilities. In the mission, The Stolen Body, on day 8, Mercer vomits and faints from the parasite at the start of the mission. After that, a long time passes until finally, in the mission, Biological Imperative, Alex, unable to adapt to the injected cancer, infects a hunter with the same extracted virus so that this hunter produces antibodies, which Mercer then consumes to cure himself. So yes, it seems that even hunters are more resistant to other viruses than Mercer himself, and that his adaptability is actually very poor. And before anyone mentions white light, I have to remind you of 2 things. 1. White light is described as highly malleable, something that can be easily modified and enhanced by external means. 2. Archer must follow a precise process to contaminate white light with Alex's blood without destroy it. The mutation of white light is caused by the manipulation of the evolved scientists of Mercer, it is not a feat of adaptability at all. But there are 2 things that really catch my attention, and make that even if Alex had this ability, it still wouldn't work against Cole. First, this wouldn't help him at all against Cole's ice, no matter how much you say it would. Firstly, because Cole's ice attacks, specifically, aren't just ice. They are insta-kills, a sub-zero gas that freezes everything it touches. This attacks would freeze Alex instantly on contact, not gradually or anything like that, but they freeze them instantly upon contact. You can literally see this in the gameplay. These attacks are so effective that they can instantly freeze even the ice soldiers themselves, soldiers with abilities based on, well, obviously ice, who can generate sub-zero radiation. And secondly, after paying attention for a while, I dare say that electricity is actually a weakness of the virus. And before a bunch of 12-year-old prototype fans come crying, let me explain. This is Captain Cross, you know him, right? The normal human with no powers who beat Alex so badly the guidebook describes it as a stroke of luck that Alex survived that fight. This man is the last line of defense against Blackwatch, an expert at eliminating the infection and its runners like Alex. And tell me, what's this man's main weapon? What? Oh yeah, an electric baton. This man has studied the virus's weaknesses his entire life. He's taken down who knows how many runners and outbreaks of the virus, and the weapon he chose to defend himself with throughout all his experience with the virus is an electric baton. Doesn't that tell you something? Perhaps the fact that this expert in combating the virus uses an electric staff as his main weapon could mean that the virus's weakness is electricity. This basic logic, plus the fact that, according to the guide, this same electric baton does so much damage to Alex that with just a few hits he can send him sprawling, tells us straight up that the virus is vulnerable to electricity. Besides the fact that it can't be blocked, which also tells us that the shield can't block electricity, and probably neither can the armor. Even the moment he's attacked by the Supreme Hunter, the first thing he does is take out his electric baton. Try to attack him with it. Not to mention, this is what a little electricity does to creatures created by the Blacklight, like Alex. It's obvious that electricity is a weakness of creatures derived from the Blacklight virus, and if neither the virus nor its variants adapted to electricity on their own for over 50 years, I don't see how Alex could adapt to it, not even close. By the way, James destroying Transformers doesn't mean anything. I can literally argue that he destroyed them with weapons or by throwing objects, and that's it.
His capacity to duplicate himself. Dennis Detweiler in an interview explicitly mentions this, stating, "All in all, this is the single most requested feature for multiplayer, co-op, and we don't have any of the conceptual problems of having two Alexes. He is, after all, a shapeshifter who has absolute control of his genetic structure. All he needs to do is grow a duplicate."
Balrog, why do you always insist on being terribly wrong? First of all, this doesn't apply at all since it's just a discarded multiplayer gameplay concept. Nothing similar ever happens in the games, it's not even hinted at. Dan himself doesn't believe Alex could do something like that, and in his own words, even if he could, he never would because of his narcissistic personality.
Remember, Alex's powers stem from the Blacklight virus, the progenitor of all life on Earth. The natural world is full of organisms with the ability to clone or duplicate themselves.
Once again, you're either misunderstanding how the virus works or deliberately lying. The fact that the Blacklight is, in a way, the catalyst for evolution doesn't mean Alex has access to all of this. The virus itself hasn't existed since the beginning of evolution in the form you're portraying it, but rather as a cell or molecule that modifies the DNA of living beings. We can literally see this in the memories of the Intrigue network. The Blacklight as a cell in the body has existed since evolution, but as a virus, it was accidentally created in Gentech. The virus works by entering a person's system and altering their cells to give their body new functions. This doesn't mean the virus has literally existed since the beginning of Earth's history, but rather that the cell it's made from is the trigger for evolution and biological modification since the dawn of life on Earth. In other words, it's a cell that everyone has in their bodies, but when modified by Gentech in the past, it causes this cell to alter the DNA and other cells of the person upon entering their system. Because of this, it's impossible for Alex to have access to all the evolutions of all the creatures on the planet. That's not how the virus and the DX1118 variant work. If Alex could do that kind of thing, neither he nor James would ever have needed to consume or gather biological matter points to evolve and unlock new abilities. DX1118 literally tries to copy the DNA of those it consumes and gathers biological material to try to unlock new abilities. Even Elizabeth needed to be pregnant beforehand to give birth to Pariah and use babies and hope for her strains, things she wouldn't have needed if the virus worked as you described. Furthermore, she constantly gathers biological material to unlock new abilities and strains, just like Alex.
Underappreciated ability is his death manipulation via Medusa's Wrath.
Okay, let's approach this in two ways. First, it's incredibly stupid to assume that just because of the description of James's ability, not Alex's, by the way, that this ability grants them death manipulation or something like that. No, it doesn't. Even in gameplay, this ability doesn't one-shot non-human enemies. And while I personally only found clips of this with Mercer, you as viewers can verify it in the game with super soldiers, brawlers, evolveds, juggernauts, and I think even hydras. None of these enemies are actually one-shot by James's heat vision. Saying this nonsense is like saying that a low-level building attack on a normal human universe could instantly kill Mercer just because it says there that it instantly kills all enemies. And the second way to approach this is that the Prototype 2 DLCs are not canon. No matter how much they cry, no matter how much they try to say otherwise, these DLCs are not canon, not a single one of them. These DLCs not only don't make sense with the abilities canonically demonstrated by James, but they directly contradict the story of the game itself. Whether it's with the skins themselves or the Chaos Creator mode strength multiplier, which makes zombie infected everywhere to an apocalyptic degree, it not only goes against the plot where Heller eliminates the entire infection in Manhattan and simultaneously makes him look completely useless, but also against what the lore dictates, that over 99% of those infected with the virus die, and there are actually very few zombie infected or brawlers throughout the story. As irrefutable proof, when you activate them, the game warns you that any progress in challenges, trophies, or events will be cancelled until you load a save file where they aren't activated. Just like in other games with non-canonical cheats, such as the GTA series, when you activate cheats, this is literally the universal indicator that an ability isn't canonical in a video game, but rather a non-canonical extra to facilitate gameplay. Oh yes, and as an extra, Dan don't think they're canon.
There's an aspect we should address. Elizabeth Green can fire an infection wave of energy, meaning the potential argument is there that because they can fire infected energy, they can infect energy itself.
I've already proven with evidence that this isn't energy, but biological material, and that what it expels is only biomass, just like when Heller or Mercer expel biomass to damage their enemies with certain attacks and their Devastator. Calling these attacks energy was just David Hodgson's way of naming something he didn't know what it was, instead of investigating the game's lore more thoroughly. But further proof that these creatures couldn't infect energy, not even in their wildest dreams, is, well, how the virus works and its dependence on the existence of cells, as I showed a few minutes ago. And that Cross's electric stun, despite having fought the virus several times, remains a normal electrical stun and wasn't infected when he fought Alex. And as I also showed, the virus isn't even capable of infecting things like gases.
It has really given me the shits of late, and that people claim that even if Cole was infected, he could burn the virus away, as his body would be producing electricity, making the inside of his body too hot for the virus to inhabit.
He absolutely could. First of all, Alex couldn't withstand this heat because, contrary to what many believe, and as I've already demonstrated, Alex wasn't at the center of the nuke's explosion at the moment of detonation and wouldn't have absorbed practically any of its heat or power. Furthermore, Alex's body remains can be easily incinerated, as we see in Prototype 2 when the white light is destroyed. Cole's electricity can be hot enough to burn the pavement beneath his feet, and as we can see in all the recharge animations, this electricity passes through Cole's entire body. There are also other instances where Cole is able to cover his body in electricity. All this without mentioning what electricity does to creatures created by the virus. And well, before diving into the miscellaneous, I just want to mention something quickly. This tweet has no validation whatsoever. If you don't consider Dan's statements, who is the writer of the latest game and therefore part of the latest canon, we shouldn't take his statements about it into account either. What does Dennis think Alex'll can or can't do? And well, just like you said in my video that Dan only gave his opinion and therefore it's not canon, here I'm telling you that Mr. Dennis is literally assuming, not confirming. Besides, again, there isn't a single piece of evidence for this in the game. If your way of seeing consumption and this were real, then why didn't James consume the common steel door in A Labor of Love? Now we move on to the miscellaneous 100%. Starting with another dumb point, that haters like Balrog says that Cole and Kessler are not the same person, nor are they comparable. Once again, I repeat, guides are not retcons that dictate the canon of games. Guides are just that, guides, primarily about gameplay, created mostly by people who had little or nothing to do with the creation of the video games. If a guide directly contradicts the game's lore, then the guides should be disregarded instantly. Just because they are official doesn't make them canon, much less put them above the actual canon. The games dictate their own canon, not books written long after the game's creation that don't take into account the ideas of the game's developers at the time of its creation. In Infamous 1, 2, and the comic, it's clearly established that Kessler is Cole from the future who traveled back in time. Cole himself, who processed all of Kessler's memories, stated this, even though Balrog tries to deny it. Cole does process all of Kessler's memories. He mentions that Kessler directly showed him everything that happened and even remembers where and how he buried his daughters. Alternate universes were never mentioned because they were irrelevant. Whenever Cole talks about it, he specifies that Kessler traveled in time, not between universes. The fact that Kessler is taller than Cole in gameplay doesn't mean anything. All the enemy conduits in the games are always taller than Cole during gameplay. In the cutscenes and comic, there doesn't seem to be a real height difference between Kessler and Cole. Besides, even if there were, it could be because Kessler's body is already too old, and like the forced conduits, he was forced to increase in size due to the power he possessed. And although the theory that Kessler could have evolved his powers until they were pure energy makes sense considering that some of Cole's powers also contain other types of energy, like kinetic energy, or that his gigawatt sword seems to have evolved into something more similar to a lightsaber, even so, as I already mentioned, Kessler's blast is electricity. But even without considering this, there are other similarities between Cole's and Kessler's powers, and at the same time, other occasions where he uses electricity, like his shockwaves and sticky grenades, which are practically identical to Cole's, or when he uses his electrical energy to create drones, or when he literally shoots electric energy in the comic. And I know you'll say that it could simply be pure energy or some nonsense like that. But no, Thwom and practically any onomatopoeia that uses the letter th are onomatopoeias used to represent electricity in comics. Besides, the effect it has on the soldiers, burning them and that. The smoke coming out of them is literally the effect electricity would have on a human body. Oh, and we can't forget the time Kessler literally electrocuted Cole. This is so obvious and irrefutable that even the color of the electricity changes depending on Cole's karma. God, even the sound makes it obvious that this is electricity. Anyway, in addition to this, I'll also mention that David confirms that Kessler and Cole are exactly the same in terms of their energy, since he spends the entire comic believing Cole is Kessler. I'll also mention this as quickly as I can, but the differences between the Beast in Kessler's and Cole's timelines aren't a valid argument either. What we see during that cinematic, like the volcanoes, could be the ability of another conduit, as could the ice that appears. Furthermore, the Beast underwent many conceptual changes from Infamous 1 to Infamous 2, and the difference in personalities is the same. The only reason the current Beast is different is because no one in Kessler's future defeated it, whereas in Cole's timeline, it also appears as a beast guided by pure instinct, according to John himself. In fact, this also confirms that in Kessler's future, he was the greatest threat to the beast, since he hunted it down to kill it. And in John's words, when he first appeared, he did exactly the same thing, attacked the greatest threat. By the way, this isn't entirely related to what I'm mentioning, but comparing the explosion caused when Cole was given his powers to the explosion with which the beast. The fact that Empire was destroyed is not an argument. One explosion was made with the purpose of destroying, the other was accidental, a simple side effect of giving Cole his powers, and it also happened several meters high.
Cole is proven definitively wrong at the start of Infamous 2, as he gets hammered like a tent peg by the beast in the beginning of the game, which is shown throughout the game to be weaker than the one in Kessler's timeline.
Excuse me. Balrog, did you even play Infamous? I don't know which fight you played, but but during their first fight, Cole easily defeated the beast. He literally cracked its skull open, knocking it out, and then destroyed it completely. The only reason the fight ended in a technical draw is because, in addition to the beast's immortality, John can directly drain the powers of conduits, as he did with Cole while holding him in his hands. This is so extreme that Cole goes from competing with Kessler, who could effortlessly generate earthquakes with punches, knock out Kessler with an uppercut, or make David stumble back with a single blow, to merely denting a locker when he angrily punched it.
As he had to regenerate from a 51 kiloton bomb.
It's always funny how you mention specifying that the beast was damaged by a 51 kiloton nuke, only considering the power and ignoring what you yourself said with Alex. Nukes aren't just about power, they're a combination of things that mess you up, including heat that easily surpasses that produced by the center of the sun. And as we can see when we launch the nuke at John, he isn't pushed back or destroyed by it. How would it be if what damaged him was the power of the nuke? We see him remain exactly in the center of the nuke. Yes, he shows signs of pain and falls backward, but this can be entirely attributed to the heat produced by the nuke. We literally see him fall to his knees at the end of the explosion. Where do you get the idea that he was vaporized? Where on earth do prototype fans get the idea that the beast had to regenerate after the nuke? John appeared in New Marais just minutes after the nuke explosion. He himself mentions that regenerating or recreating himself is a complicated process for him.
I had to pull myself back together. Do you have any idea how hard that is?
Taking over a week to regenerate the first time. The fact that his teleportation method is similar to the black hole he created in his first appearance means nothing. They aren't even the same, and even the vortex he creates upon his first appearance could be interpreted as his teleportation method. John was reduced to less than atoms at the dock in the historic district, and in his first appearance, he appears in front of a dock in the neon district. So no, the beast definitely didn't regenerate from that explosion. The most damage we see it inflicts is the beast falling on its back or knees, and that's all. What we see when it appears in New Marais could simply be its way of absorbing all the radiation from the nuke and then teleporting. That's all. By the way, I want to mention this quickly, but I actually have a way to buff the nuke. Even if Wolf mentions very briefly that the nuke's power is 51 kilotons, it could be much more powerful. What? You prototype fans can buff your 75 kiloton nuke based on literally nothing, but I can't do the same based on solid evidence. Give me a break. First of all, Wolf himself mentions that while the nuke's power should be around 51 kilotons, he doesn't actually know its power and should do field tests since he's never made anything even remotely similar to a nuke. He's a geneticist, he's probably never even made a single explosive. And secondly, the beast is about 60 meters tall, or 200 feet. Considering that from the point of detonation the beast can no longer be seen without using the nuke zoom, John would have to be between 33 and 60 kilometers away, since it's invisible at ground level and then at the height of the crane Cole climbs onto. You can do the calculation yourself. For the nuke's blast wave to launch Zeke in a cart flying in disorient Cole, they would need to receive between 2 and 4 psi of force from the shock wave. Therefore, the nuke's power would have to be much greater than just 51 kilotons, much greater. More than 30 or 60 megatons in reality, and I mean, if you don't believe me, you can do the math yourself. If you believe the nonsense that the 75 kiloton nuke from Prototype 1 is actually 65, then you should definitely believe what I'm saying, because unlike the prototype scalers who limit themselves to assumptions, hyperbole, or dialogue taken out of context, I'm providing real evidence that the nuke should have a power greater than 75 kilotons, or you know what would be much better. Ignore all these garbage, made-up theories and go by what the canon of both games tells us. I only did this dumb thing to demonstrate how easy it is to invent something that directly contradicts what the canon throws in your face and pretend it makes sense to sound more convincing, something Balrog is an expert at. Anyways, speaking of Balrog, am I the only one who notices that Balrog literally hates Cole? I mean, to say that.
And when Cole is able to take him on, he has to be plugged into a substation to even stand a chance.
To say this when he clearly demonstrated being at or above the beast, and it's never specified or even implied that Cole needs this substation to become stronger, can only be interpreted as hatred for the character. Cole recharging with the substation wasn't even part of the plan, it's never mentioned. It's simply the effect Cole has on all the substations whenever he passes by them, just like every time Cole restores power to New Murray. At no point is it mentioned that the substation makes Cole stronger or anything like that, it only recharges him so he can keep shooting since the rest of the area has no electricity. Okay, now to get to the final part of the video, I need to mention 3 things. Hey, Dante here. Sorry for the cut. While editing one last time, I realized I didn't mention that Alex needs a whole damn army of evolves to eradicate Blackwatch and Gentech, and literally his entire plan in Prototype 2 revolves around that, even though no one in Powerscaling mentions it.
We're in Gentech. We're in Blackwatch. Our eyes and ears are everywhere. You're building an army, and when there's enough of us, you and I will lead an attack that will wipe Blackwatch and Gentech off the face of the earth.
And the virus.
What?
The virus goes too, right?
All of it. It's in the plan.
And no, he wasn't lying about his plan, he only started lying when Heller asked about the virus, and you can tell by his voice, attitude and movements. Besides, if this weren't true, Alex wouldn't have even needed to do the whole white light plan. Anyway, I'll leave you with the rest of the video and those 3 things. First, a durability feat I forgot to include, but which a friend of mine asked me to. Coles when survive a high-speed truck crash almost unscathed, even before activating his powers. Now, some people think this feat isn't measurable because some real people survive similar accidents, but this is obviously measurable. The fact that people in real life can survive car accidents doesn't mean anything, this is fiction. This crash is clearly mentioned to show that Cole already had superhuman or at least peak human durability even before becoming an activated conduit. Besides, no one has ever directly survived being hit by a high-speed truck that then ran over them completely and walked away with a few scratches the next day in real life. To say this feat isn't measurable is like denying that fiction and reality are completely different things. Now, moving on to the second to last thing I'll mention, the box. Many people use the trap box scene from Infamous 2 to argue that Cole is a glass cannon and bullets can pass through him. I'm not going to lie, this is simply a huge plot hole. Absolutely nothing in the scene makes sense. The writers wanted Cole and Bertram to have a brief conversation without fighting, that's obvious. But they simply didn't know how to do it and ended up with a plot hole similar to, but worse than, Yujiro and the net in Baki. It makes no sense that Cole would call for help quickly and make it seem like he could die from gunfire when he has not only demonstrated before that he can tank high-caliber weapons and powerful attacks from people like the Beast without much difficulty, but he has also demonstrated more than enough speed to dodge those same bullets effortlessly. Nothing in this scene makes sense. He could have escaped before the gates closed. He could have destroyed the gates with any ice or napalm power. He could have even destroyed the ceiling easily with any of his attacks and escaped. He could even have taken cover from the fired shots with his shield, but all of this was omitted because the scene clearly wasn't made taking Cole's level into account. And it can't be taken for scaling because it's obvious that none of the writers considered scaling when making this scene. This is a typical case where a character literally had the script against him. But, since I know most Prototype fans think like 8-year-old autistic children and view video games as real universes where every plot hole means something, instead of what they are, video games written by people who sometimes disregard power levels for the sake of the plot, let's develop an explanation using the guide, something they love so much and take as an undeniable and irrefutable truth. So, the guide explicitly states that the box dissipates Cole's powers. This is important because it's been implied that even the physical characteristics of the conduits are linked to the power of their gene, and that it's this same gene that gains power. Every time a conduit is deprived of their powers, their physical abilities are also drastically reduced. Like Alden, the old man who survived a fall that, in Cole's words, would kill anyone, being knocked out by Moya with his genes semi-neutralized and just starting to function again. Or Cole himself, being unable to break a pair of handcuffs with his gene neutralized. Or, moving on to Second Son, where it's made clear that Augustine can neutralize the conduit gene. We have examples like Hank, the same guy who can withstand and take attacks from Delsin, grenades, and shots from the DUP, etc., saying he thought he'd die from a simple car crash. Or taking Delsin hostage for fear that Reggie would shoot him. Or Fetch, who, with an empty tank and her powers neutralized by Delsin, was overpowered by a powerless human like Reggie. But I honestly maintain that this scene is simply a huge plot hole that wasn't considered at any point, taking into account Cole's power level. It's that simple. Plot holes like this happen all the time in all kinds of works and shouldn't be taken seriously. This connects directly to the last point I'll mention, which is that, as I already mentioned, the physical and energetic power of the conductors is linked to their conductor gene. The thing is, this conductor gene proves to be something that exists far beyond the cells and molecules of the body, reaching the subatomic level, as demonstrated by John being erased down to atoms and still being able to rebuild himself thanks to his conductor gene. This would mean that the activated conductor gene is something that functions even below the atomic level, which explains the subatomic resistance of the conductors. This also tells us that, in a hypothetical case, Alex wouldn't be able to copy the conductor gene since the limit of his genetic access is, at the molecular level, if we're being generous. And the conclusion I came to is that while he obviously couldn't copy an already active conductor gene, we don't know how the gene works before it's active. It could be that it only becomes something subatomic when it's activated or not, so there's a small chance that Alex could copy it from a non-active conductor, although he would still need someone like the Beast to activate it for him to do so. Well, I think that's the end of the video, guys. I appreciate your patience if you waited for me, and if not, that's fine too. I finally finished this after so long, but what else do I have to say before ending the video? Just something I read a while ago. Ever since Cole won the death battle, Prototype fans have gone to great lengths to make Cole look as weak as possible and Alex as strong as possible. And this is absolutely true. All it's done is reaffirm for everyone that the death battle was right, because if they were as blatantly wrong as Prototype fans claim, they could simply prove the death battle wrong and let the facts speak for themselves, as I did in this video. But none of them have done any of that. Instead, they manipulate the numbers tooth and nail, which tells me they're just immature, angry fans because Alex is simply weaker, slower, less durable, and has useless hacks compared to Cole. I hope this video has debunked all those arguments that hypocritical, mindless Prototype fans just copy and paste over and over again, hoping we'll all believe them instead of doing our own research. Every single one of those arguments, as I said, is just taking a fanfic and trying to make it seem canon by twisting and shoving in the most ridiculously distorted bits to make your edgy lord look good. Anyway, to everyone else, I really hope you liked this video and found it useful. It was a lot of work, and I'm really sorry it took me so long. Thanks for watching, sayonara.